Hi, I'm Julie Black, and I'm going to be doing my presentation on early brain development. My presentation will focus on brain development, synapses, how they work, and fast mapping. As early as 12 weeks before conception, the brain cells are active and awake. They're beginning to form the early brain and the brain that will be used throughout life. At birth, there are over 100 billion neurons which help to create a blueprint or a guess as to what the brain has the potential to become. It's like an architect that has a house print or blueprint of what this house could be, but what that actual house will look like has yet to be determined. Electrical activity in the brain can actually change the shape of the brain's mental circuits or the patterns that enable a newborn baby to recognize a father's voice, a mother's face, or a mobile hanging over its bed. This activity is driven by experiences, and these experiences are what help to determine the unique version this blueprint will become. As early as 3 weeks after conception, the brain is just a 3 milliliter neural tube. At 3 to 4 weeks after conception, the neural groove closes and 3 distinct regions, a hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain, begin to take form. These develop into the 3 sections of the brain, the upper portion being the frontal cortex that's responsible for anticipation, planning, and impulse control. Eventually, the brain will have the folds, crevices, and wrinkles that we see here in a 9-month-old fetus. These wrinkles are what make the difference between an animal brain and a human brain. So even though they're similar in size, the human brain has a larger frontal cortex in proportion to its overall size. So this, with all the folds and crevices, adds to its complexity and differentiates it from an animal brain. So this is an actual brain of a 2-week-old baby. And you can see its size in relation to the same brain at 1 year old. Now, also notice that there's white matter here and how it's changing and becoming more defined and spreading. The brain is sometimes said to be full of gray matter, which is supposed to be the stuff of intelligence. So this is the same brain at 2 years. Now by age 2, a child's brain has twice the synapses and consumes twice as much energy as an adult. Let's take a look at synapses. What are synapses? Let's look at this neuron. These branch-like fingers coming from the neuron are dendrites. This is an axon from another neuron. Neurons communicate by firing or sending electrochemical impulses through their axons, and these impulses are picked up by the dendrites of another neuron. The dendrite brings the message to the cell body of their neuron, which then might fire and convey a message through its axon to the dendrites of another neuron. The site of communication between 2 neurons is a cleft rather than a physical site, and the end of an axon near a synapse is going to be widened. It's going to widen into a button, and on the other side is another button, and that's the dendrite. In between the axon and the dendrite is where that synapse is going to occur. And that's where the actual crossing of information happens. So the axon is what's going to be sending the stimulus, and the dendrite is what receives the stimulus. And the synapse is the actual transfer of the stimulus to the neuron. the neuron is going to know exactly what to do with this stimulus. It will know whether to send it to the vision region of the brain, the memory region of the brain. Every stimulus has a place, and through these dendrites and axons and the synapses firing, that is how all of these connections are made. So I want to give you a perspective of what's going on here. This is an actual picture of a single neuron. The little blue and green wires that you see are axons. If a newborn brain comes with over 100 billion neurons, this can help us visualize the extent of what's going on inside the brain. So between birth and the age 2, an estimated 5-fold increase in dendrites in the cortex is happening, with about 100 trillion synapses present at age 2. So, according to one expert, that is about 40,000 new synapses being formed every second in the infant's brain. Now, their synapses continue to form throughout life, and they reach their highest average density or peak around age 2, and that would be 15,000 synapses per neuron. And this will remain level until 10 to 11 years old. What's happening after these peak periods is what we call synaptic pruning. Here's an illustration of the pruning process in the brain. At birth, there is an excess of brain connections, followed by pruning that leaves the system in a more precisely organized pattern. It's a more precise pattern because through all the experiences, the brain forms synapses. And through those synapses, the brain connects, and whatever isn't used or needed, the brain will eliminate. So around 10 years old, the brain begins to destroy the weakest synapses. It's only going to preserve those that have been transformed through experience. Now, the different brain regions develop on different time schedules. For example, vision, their overproduction that happens is going to be around the mid-first year, and it's going to reach adult levels by mid-preschool years. Language and hearing are similar, but they are on a different or later schedule. So depending on what type of neural activity or brain region we're looking at that or is responsible for a specific activity, that's when that critical period or sensitive period will happen. Okay, fast mapping is something that happens in the brain. It's connected to the critical period of language that we just talked about, where there were those peak periods in preschool years. Fast mapping is the idea that there's a quick initial partial understanding of a word that's derived from the context in which it's used, and also that there's a memory store that holds information passively for a few seconds, and this store is capable of entering and re-entering items. Let's see if we can look at how preschoolers map a new word. Preschoolers create fast mappings with language and non-language information on the basis of brief casual encounters with new words. One study wanted to know if a child mapped a new word after one casual encounter. They did this by introducing a new color word. Generally, Preschoolers will fast map colors into broad categories. For example, blue, red, etc. They often will assign blue or gray to turquoise, not because they don't see the difference in the hues, but because they don't have the same boundaries that an adult would use, nor have they yet learned specifics. This study tested what a child would do with a new color word, chromium. They set up the casual encounter in a classroom setting where the teacher figure would point to two objects and say, "Could you hand me the chromium car?" Not the red one, the chromium. Most of the time, the child would know to bring the correct item. Emergent mapping occurred after 3 to 4 encounters with the word. They found that emergent mapping occurred by the age 22 months. For example, when the child was shown 3 separate objects, 2 of which were familiar to them, and one was something they never before had seen, the child was given the instruction, "Could you hand me the Zoob?" They would choose the unfamiliar object and somehow know it wasn't the ball or the car. This illustrates one-to-one mapping. We might think this is the process of elimination, but what was found was that it illustrates the idea of one-to-one mapping, where a child will reject that a ball has more than one meaning. One object has one meaning. Car has one meaning. Therefore, the jam paperclip must be the Zoob, so they hand them the Zoob. It's been found that one-to-one mapping and fast mapping happens as early as 17 months. Let's talk about making connections. We spoke about neurons and how every stimulus is taken by the neurons, and the neurons know exactly where that stimulus belongs. Each stimulus has a place in a different region of the brain or part of the body. Neurons sharing content is an important part of making connections. When neurons share contents, for example, memory, humans can link them more easily. For example, if they have a memory of exposure to the word chromium at the park, and then later have exposure to the word chromium in the classroom, recalling the memory that they had at the park would likely bring back the memory they had at the classroom. This is exciting and can maybe help understand a little bit about what's happening when we have these connections that we talked about and saw in the brain that are happening. It's also exciting in how to help children learn and teach them by having better understanding of what's going on in their brain. Now, this can be applied to more than just language. For example, learning to pair faces and voices happen in similar conditions as learning new words. I really hope you enjoyed learning a little bit about brain development and how synapses and fast mappings work in the young developing brain. And I hope your synapses have been firing. Thank you.